Number 249 for our Bible class this morning. After this, we'll be led in a word of prayer and then dismissed. 249. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you.
Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this day that you've given us to assemble and to study from your word. We pray that you'll be with all the teachers at this time, that what they present is true to your word, and that all of us as students may profit from that. We thank you for this group that meets here. We thank you for all that you've done for us. We pray that you'll be with us in our time of worship this morning. We thank you so much for Jesus and for all that he's done for us. In his name we pray. Amen.
Does anyone need a lesson sheet for lesson 24? Open your Bibles to John, the 9th chapter. We're zooming right through chapter 9. This is a very interesting chapter to me. There's many profound lessons, I think, that we find within this story of the blind man. And I haven't really figured out who the focus of the story is, whether it's the blind man or the hypocritical Pharisees. I just haven't figured that out yet. But
Jesus.
huh?
Jesus is the focus of the story.
Well, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, reading beginning at.
I think the focus of the story is whatever you need to get out of it at the time. You know.
That's a good point, obviously, because there are several lessons that we can look at in that. Jesus being one of them, and you can teach the rest of the class. That's all I can say.
I thought you were posing a question.
Okay, from now on, if I want to ask a question, I want to come over and point at you. Chapter 9 begins with Jesus performing a miracle. He sees a man that's born blind and anoints the man's eyes with mud, gives him instructions to go wash in the pool of Siloam. And when he does that, he receives his sight. And after the miracle, he returns to his neighborhood, obviously, because his neighbors see him. And they're kind of astonished that here's the man that was blind is seeing. And there was some division because some of them just said, yes, here he is. He's obviously a miracle has occurred. He can see. Others said, I'm not real sure about that. Maybe he looks like him and it's not really him. So they have this discussion about what's going on. And that brings us to the obviously for some reason they feel it necessary to take him to the Pharisees. Now, we discussed a little bit last time whether or not this was not the Sanhedrin by any means. Sanhedrin has both Sadducees and Pharisees, and this specifically speaks to Pharisees being the one that they take him to. So, and because of the threat to excommunicate them from the synagogue, it seemed like that maybe these are men that are leaders of that local synagogue at that particular time. So they take them to the Pharisees, and they're going to have what I call an inquisition. And I call it an inquisition because it's kind of like the Inquisition in history, because they're not really interested in what's true, nor are they interested in what's just. What they're interested in is disproving anything that Jesus might have done or any claim that he made of himself. And one of the great things about the story in this inquisition is, and we'll get to this in just a little bit, it amazes me how this uneducated man educates the educated Pharisees about the law. And so it's kind of, Paul says there are not very many noble, not very wise that are called into the kingdom. And you kind of get an understanding maybe why that is. Because it seems like the people that are, educated and noble and on the rich side of life, they rather have their opinion, their ideas, their way, rather than yielding submission to God or to anyone else. So it's just an intriguing and very interesting, and I think very spiritually uplifting story about this young man, his courage, his willingness to testify truth, even though they're trying to get him to speak something that's not true. He's going to stay with the truth, and because of that, obviously Jesus glorifies him at the end of the chapter. So we got down to verse 13 in our study, and let's just read down to verse 17. The first part, the inquisition goes all the way over to verse, I think, 33. When they finally excommunicate him, kick him out. But it's kind of in different sections. Verse 13 says, they brought him who was formerly blind to the Pharisees. Now it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Now this may have been the reason that his neighbors felt like it was necessary to take him to the Pharisees to find out whether or not there was, the Sabbath law had been violated. So it was the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again. Now, that kind of indicates that maybe some of these Pharisees were in this first discussion, because they asked up here in verses 6 through verse 12, they asked him how he received his sight, and he explained how the instructions that Jesus got him. So they said the Pharisees asked him again how he received his sight, and he said to him, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Now, previously, he identified Jesus as the man that anointed his eyes and gave him the instruction to wash. But here he says, he put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Now, therefore, some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God because he does not keep the Sabbath. Now, here's the debate. And I think probably the debate that kind of goes on all during Jesus' ministry. Others said, how can a man who is a sinner do such signs? And there was division among them. Well, we've kind of witnessed that in the previous chapters. There's some people that witness the miracles and understand what a miracle truly is, and understand by whose power miracles can only be accomplished. And that, of course, is God. They recognize that truth. And so here we got, people said, well, he's not keeping our traditional Sabbath law, so obviously he can't be a prophet or a man of God. And other people saying, well, wait just a minute. He's performed a miracle. Who has the power to perform miracles? We know originally they said that the devil had that kind of power. I'm just kind of puzzled where they get that information. Where is it recorded that the devil ever performed a miracle? Other than possessing people and, forcing them in that possession to do things that are harmful. And so I'm just kind of interested. It's kind of an interesting statement to me. How it is that, the devil, they can think the devil did this. But anyway, the other scene, they saw the miracle for what it was. Then they said to the blind man again. Now, the division, obviously those people who believe now become outspoken because the rest of the questions, the rest of the confrontation seems to be between those who disregarded, who disbelieved that the miracle was from God and who were trying in some way to discredit Jesus. So they said to the blind man, "What do you say about him because he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He is a prophet." Now, why would the man say he is a prophet?
To get away from invoking God's name on this miracle.
I'm sorry?
To get away from mentioning God in this miracle. They call him a prophet instead of, from God.
Well, okay. But is a prophet from God? Isn't the prophet God sent? See? I think that he's kind of giving credit, acknowledging, obviously, what these other Jews said. Well, he couldn't be how could he not be from God and do the miracle? And so he said, well, he's a prophet. He doesn't say that Jesus is what? God. He doesn't say that Jesus is not only God, but the Messiah. So obviously, he just, right at this particular point, what the blind man recognizes is that Jesus was God sent. That God was with him. Now that's what these Pharisees are trying to disprove. They want to discredit Jesus as being a sinner. What did they say that he violated? The Sabbath. Did Jesus violate the Sabbath? Everybody go like this. Well, what can they accuse him of violating then? Their traditions, exactly. Their interpretations of the Sabbath law. And they seem to have, over time, added so many things that were not really included in the original Sabbath law. And now, obviously, anointing somebody's eyes with mud is added to that particular list. So they're looking at Jesus healing the man as equal to what?
Sin.
I'm sorry?
As sin.
His actions. What are they saying his actions are equal to? If he's violated the Sabbath, then he was doing what? I'm sorry? Okay. He was working. You see, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to labor on the Sabbath. So they're looking at the miracle as, the same thing that a doctor might do. When we prescribe, go home and take 3 aspirin every 2 hours. And you'll be all right. That they're equating it to work. Now Jesus, argues with the Pharisees. We have 7 accounts in the Gospels of Jesus confronting the Pharisees and the Jews about the Sabbath law. But here they said they were equating, well, he's performed this miracle. He's just like a doctor working. This is his job. He got paid for this. And obviously that's not what Jesus is doing. So Jesus actually asked them at the synagogue one time, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or not? And he had performed a miracle after that. So they're equating this to work. They say Jesus is working, he's violating the Sabbath, and if he's violating the Sabbath, he can't be what?
Can't be a problem.
Yeah, he can't be from God, exactly. He's a sinner. And that, I think, just sets the stage for the discussion that continues to occur. And he said, he is a prophet. But the Jews do not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight. Now, this moves into a different section altogether. The first section is the initial questions of the Inquisition. So there's, in this, one of the things that I think it's interesting, it seems like that these stories about the Pharisees, the headline ought to be flashing light, hypocritical, hypocrites. And because that seems to be their modus operandi. While they're accusing other people's being sinners themselves, of violating the law, when they point the finger at Jesus and try to come up with some kind of accusation that might, at least, demean him in the eyes of those people that are following him. Or if they, you can get looking, maybe they can charge him with violating the law. And if they're really lucky, they can charge him with something that he would be deserving of death. And of course, obviously, in doing all of this, they're over and over and over again, they're violating the law themselves. Within this inquisition, is Jesus ever asked to testify? No. And so what did Nicodemus say in the previous account? What about the law? What does the law say? We can't judge him unless we ask him first. He gets to testify in his behalf. So they make all these judgments without the testimony of Jesus himself. So here it is, the first part of it. And the second part begins in verse 18. And this is the part where the Jews began to make excuses. Now, what was the discussion about in the first, when his neighbors first saw him? What was the discussion about up there in those verses?
They weren't sure.
Is this the man or not?
Is this man or not? Somebody over here. So somebody said, this is the man. What did the others say? Yeah, it looks like it. Yeah. He may have been his twin brother, but this is not the man. So this is what, this is what the Pharisees pick up on. Some of the Pharisees did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight. Now, so obviously here's an excuse. This is not a real miracle. This is something this guy's dreamed up. He's trying to sell us that Jesus did this miracle. He says, I was born blind, but it's not really the guy that was born blind. It's somebody else. So what did they do? What's the next step? Okay, they want to prove that this is the guy. So how do they do it? They call the parents. Now, this is one of the great disappointments of this story. I think everybody in this room are loving, caring parents. And let me just ask you parents, those that are not parents, you can't answer. How many of you had to defend your children in some shape, form, or fashion? I mean, not violently, but defend them, stand up for them in some way or the other. All of them? Everybody? Y'all didn't raise your hand. Okay, raise your hand. Okay. You down there, you can raise your hand. Okay. Have you really? Has she done something to be defended of? I don't believe that. So here we are. Here we are at this stage of the parents. They're a real disappointment in my eyes anyway. So they called the parents of him who had received the sight, and they asked them, saying, is this your son, whom you say, again now, all of this is kind of a relative statement, whom you say was born blind? And their answer is, how then does he now see? His parents answered them, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind. Now, I mean, how much more proof do they need that this is the man that was blind that now sees? I mean, his parents said, yep, this is our son. And by the way, yes, he was born blind. Now, how he sees, we don't know. I don't know that they really even want to get involved in the whole discussion about how he was, how he received his sight. But it comes to that. He's saying, we know that he's born blind, but in verse 21, but by what means he now sees, we do not know, or who opened his eyes, we do not know. Okay, so again, now they begin to slip. Now they begin to back up. And yes, he's our son. Yes, indeed, he was born blind. We're in John chapter 9, and we're working down at verse 20. We know this is our son. We know that he was born blind, but that's as much as they're willing to confess and stand up for. Because now how it was done and who did it, We do not know. Now, those may be truthful statements. Right? That we don't know that the man ran home and told his mom and dad, hey, guess what? I can see Jesus healed me. It doesn't say that. The neighbors, obviously, there was this big discussion whether or not there's a miracle or not, whether this is really the man that was blind. But now we have these parents, they're called in, they come in, they're asked, is this man your son? Was he born blind? Well, yes, he is our son. And yes, we know he was born blind. Who else could prove it any more clearly than they? But then then we don't know. That begins to, they begin to weaken, if you will. So the respect for the parents is not really here. I don't think it always intrigues me just exactly why this happens. So they call the man's parents to find out if truly he was the man that was born blind. So, yes.
Well, it tells what kind of parents they are in verse 8, because it says, is this not the one who sat and begged? So they've already kicked him out of the house.
Okay, that's an interesting thought.
Well, but I mean, he's blind, he would need help, and so it says he sat there and begged.
Well, that's an interesting thought, sure enough. Maybe he was begging to raise money for them.
Either way.
Huh?
Either way.
Well, sure, absolutely. I've known some parents that kind of like that. Have you?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. But either way, you don't have much respect for them together. That's an interesting thought. I hadn't looked at it that way, but could have been. You're on your own, son. Go ahead. So don't come home without a little money. And I don't know, but interesting thought. So they they're asked who your son is. They respond, we know that he's our son, but then they begin to crawdad. We don't know how he received this out. And it's almost like, no, we don't know what the answer is. Can we go home now? Are you done with us? And but as the questions continue, we see they go worse and worse. Now, John explains their attitude. And down in verse, 23. Therefore the parents said, he is of age now, ask him. And they did this because they were afraid to be excluded from the synagogue. The Jews had already said that those who confessed in Jesus would be excommunicated. Now, why is that such a threat? Why is being kicked out of the synagogue a threat that these parents were afraid of? These parents whose son had been healed. These parents whose son was blind all of his life. Why were they afraid of being excommunicated from the synagogue?
That is their whole life, really.
Okay.
To be a member of the church, that's where your laws came from. That's where everything came from. And if you're not in that group of people who is still in the synagogue, you're kind of shunned.
Okay. Okay, that's really the idea, isn't it?
Well, and Nicodemus felt the same way. He came by night.
Yeah.
For fear of that very thing.
That very thing.
It must have been a very big thing. You couldn't just go somewhere else.
Yeah, you couldn't go to another synagogue. Yeah, because you're excluded from them as well. You couldn't join a denominational synagogue.
Exactly.
So, anyway, but what I read is that if you're eliminated or excommunicated from the synagogue, you are actually excommunicated from Jewish society. You can't do business. They won't do business with you. You might as well go live with the Gentiles. Because, I mean, it's a real threat to the people. So they're really afraid of that kind of treatment, that kind of excommunication. The consequence of that, maybe they would have to do what? What would they have to do if they're excommunicated from society? They'd have to move, exactly. Pack up, sell the property. Nobody's going to buy it because they're excommunicated. They have to give it away and go somewhere else. I mean, a real threat. These parents were really afraid of being excommunicated, and they were more afraid of that excommunication than they were afraid of defending or determined to defend their own son and the miracle that was done for him. Now, what's really interesting about this, turn on Matthew chapter 10. This thought came to mind, and I wonder if it's not a good illustration of what Jesus says in Matthew 10. In Matthew 10, Alan, would you read verses 34 through 36? Matthew 10, 34 through 36.
Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foes shall be those of his own household. He who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me.
Now, it is the events here in chapter 9 between the parents and their son, is that an illustration of what's going on? What Jesus talks about, those who follow him might occur, or will occur, excuse me. Is it a good example of that? What is the man willing to do as far as Jesus is concerned? What's his attitude about Jesus? He's already confessed that he's a what? A prophet, a man of God. Okay, so he's obviously on Jesus' side because he said he did this. He's a man of God. He healed me. Now his parents are afraid of what? What are they afraid of?
They're not afraid of that. They're afraid of the people that are in the same society with them that can do things to them.
Okay. So does that make that a good illustration of what Jesus says here? It seems to me like that it is. It seems to me like what we read about here is what can happen to us if times get bad enough, or maybe has happened to us. Maybe you have been converted and your family, because of your conversion, won't have anything else to do about you because now you're a member of the Church of Christ. I don't know if that's happened to you. It's happened to somebody in my family. And that would be very painful, obviously. That would be, to some people, a big threat. Some people won't obey the gospel because they believe if they do that, their family might think that they're not saved themselves and cause some bitterness within the family. So here we are. Yes, Ken.
A bigger illustration of that is being excommunicated from the Catholic Church.
Well, that is true. That would be an illustration of being kicked out of the synagogue. But the attitude of the parents towards the child, to me, is what we're looking at here. And they just don't have the courage to defend and stand up for their son, where their son is standing up for Jesus. And when we stand up for Jesus, what's going to happen to us? What do we promise? Look in John chapter 16. Jesus tells us to get ready for this kind of action and this kind of attitude. In John chapter 16, we're going to read verses 2 through 3. Travis, do you mind reading that for us, please? John 16, beginning at verse 2.
They will put you out of the synagogues. Yes, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers God service. How far?
Yeah, one more.
One more. And these things they will do to you because they have not known the Father nor me.
So here it is. He's talking to the apostles, obviously, and he's warning them of what's going to occur, what might occur to them as they go and preach the gospel and teach the gospel. And he says, the time is coming that whoever kills you will think that he offers God service. So now let's think about that for just a minute. When we think about this man and his parents are more interested in staying in the synagogue because in the synagogue they have a relationship with who?
Everybody.
With God. According to their religion. Now, I don't think that they're really interested in the relationship with God more than the people. But the idea here is, people are going to use that excuse to persecute Christians, if you will. And we need to obviously be aware of that. We need to be prepared for that. Go back a chapter, John chapter 15. Marshall, read verse 18 and 19.
Chapter 15, 18, and 19.
Yes, sir.
If the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. Yet, because you are not of the world, that I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you.
Now, why is that so? Why does Jesus say, if they hate you, they hated me? You're not of the world, so the world hates you. Why is that true?
The world hates the truth
Okay, the world hates the truth.
because it shows the error of what they're saying, doing, living, etc., and it convicts them of that.
Okay.
Being of the world is directly connected to gratifying the flesh.
And that's true. Yeah. So number one, you like yourself. Number two, the world likes you. But why does the world like you? And what did you say again? I mean, the world hates you. I'm sorry.
It convicts them of their sin.
It convicts them of their sin. Jesus said, "This is the condemnation. The light has come to the world. But those who are in the world don't come to the light. Those who love the darkness don't come to the light." What's the point of that whole thing? What does the light do?
Shows their faults.
It shows their faults. How many really like to be corrected? Go ahead and raise your hand if you enjoy that. I'm not raising my hand. These two girls right here are chuckling. I want to see y'all on the front row. I mean, we don't like to be corrected, and I think that's the point that Jesus made. Yes, ma'am.
But the other thing that worries me about this is a lot of people like us and we want to be liked. You know? I wonder if we never stand up for the truth. It's why so many in the world like us.
Yeah. And we don't want that friendship to end. Yeah. I'm not real sure that may not have been one of the causes of these parents' action. They may lose some friends. They have to, they're excommunicated from society. What about their family? What about their friends? You're right. I think that's a good point. There's so much we have to sacrifice when we stand up for the Lord. Yes, sir.
That is Luke 6:26. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so they did of the false prophets.
Yeah.
So that should be a warning flag to us.
Exactly. Exactly. If everybody agrees with us, then where are we headed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't have to agree with us. We just tolerate them and never speak up.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. But I mean, the point that Jim makes here, if they're patting you on the back, then obviously somebody's on the broad road. Either you're both on the narrow road or you're both on the broad road. Well, so the point that Jesus warned us of is that we really need to be careful. Because we're Christians that stand up for truth. People who stand up for Christ. People who want to stand for the gospel truth are not going to be liked by everyone. You're not even going to be liked by people in your own family. By the best friend you graduated from high school with. That's a long time ago. But I mean, do we understand that? People don't like folks who stand up and are adamant about being a Christian and what makes someone a Christian and what causes someone to be condemned. They don't want to hear that. And if I stand up for that truth, somebody, maybe even part of my family, is not going to like it. And they're not going to like me as a result of that. And that's the point I think that Jesus makes in these warnings. We have to be aware of the fact. Here we have this blind man who's standing up for Jesus. He is a prophet. And they begin to bring all of these excuses up to him. They ain't got his family there, his mom and dad. And they say, well, I don't know anything about this miracle. Ask him. And that's the same thing can happen to us. We can lose family or friends when we stand for the truth. And we're adamant about not compromising the truth to those that we know and those that we might love. Because standing for the truth, Paul says it's a battle. We're engaged in a warfare. And let me just ask you something. Everybody watch, John Wayne movies when there's a war going on. Are the people that shoot one another, do they like one another? No, they don't. We have to be very careful. We obviously love the people of the world because we want to save them in some shape or form. But they don't like us because we're telling them that, you know, if they dance or drink, if they're homosexual, if they, you know, commit adultery, all of those, if you're doing all this, you're not a Christian. Oh, what do you mean I'm not a Christian? I believe in Jesus. Yeah, well, so does the devil. You know, when we make that statement, when we're that adamant about truth, there are going to be people that do not know us. Yes, sir.
Is there a progression here? They try to discredit Jesus. You know, he can't be good, he can't be right, he violated the Sabbath. Well, that didn't get traction, so they called him in. Well, what do you have to say about this guy? Well, that didn't give them satisfaction either, so they called the parents in. Let's see if we can't find somebody that will agree with us here. And try to dismiss this somehow.
It does. The inquest intensifies, I believe. I think there is a progression. Step by step. They're not getting satisfied, so they take the next step. And the last step, they go back to the man, and it really gets tense at that particular time.
And then when he fails to give them the right answer again and challenges them, and see, I think that was the final straw when he challenges them. When you go, I don't know this. That they wouldn't tolerate that at all.
When the uneducated, educated, the educated, that's when that's exactly, they wouldn't tolerate that at all. So there's so much about this I think that we need to be aware of. The reason that the world hates God's people is because there's enmity between God's children and the children of the devil. When did that start? Huh?
In their garden.
Why did it start? Because of what? Sin. Exactly. And you know, you just see so clearly in the temptation and the sin that Eve committed, the enmity. And what causes the enmity? Because what led to Eve's sin?
Temptation.
Personal desire, was it not? It's good for food, it looks good, it's going to make me wise. All that's about me. But Jesus is all about what? Someone else. Him first and then others. But him first means that we've got to do what he tells us to do. So that enmity, like it said, there's enmity because those in the world don't like to be reminded of their sinfulness. I don't know, probably if you've observed in the last 20 years or so, the acceptance of homosexuality in our society. It began by the lawsuits silencing people to speak against that. And then it moved to the law where they have rights. You can't not hire somebody because of their choices, their lifestyle choices. And on until, what's the attitude today in most people about homosexuality?
Acceptance.
I'm sorry?
Acceptance.
Oh, yeah. If they want to do that, that's fine. I don't want to do it, but they want to do it, that's fine with me. Yes.
That's Christians' apathy to speak up about it.
And, well, that's true too. But that's progression. That's part of that progression that leads to the situation that we're in today. And but it's not only led, to the acceptance of homosexuality. What else is the byproduct of that? Abortion, the rejection of the Scripture. No more prayer in school. No more 10 Commandments on the walls of the school. You can't talk about anything religious. On and on and on. The removal of God from society. So we just see that progression go on and on and on. And basically what you do, if you read Romans 1, beginning about verse 19, you see that progression that Paul talked about the Gentiles occurring right here in this nation. And like Kim says, a lot of that falls at our shoes because we're failing to stand up for the truth and teach those who are lost. Carl, did you have a thought, sir? Okay. Anyone else? Verse 24.
Buddy,
Yes, ma'am.
began long ago indoctrinating us with tolerance. We must tolerate. And they started with children. Toleration until now we're conditioned, society is conditioned to tolerance. You're okay, I'm okay.
Yeah, I agree that you're right. Well, you know, that's the progression of propaganda.
Exactly.
If you read the history, does anybody like history? Anybody like to study history? Anybody studied the history of the Second World War? The rise of Hitler and his regime. And you know how he convinced the society in Germany that killing all the Jews that exist is right? By that very thing. Convincing them from youth to their adulthood that the Jews are bad. And he just gets worse and worse. That's the very thing that they've done in this country. That's, you know, that's the way that sin occurs. That's what happens if we're not careful. Now, verse 24, I want to think about this. We'll begin this next time. They said, so they called again the man. The women, the parents said, we don't know, he's of age. Excuse us, please. We want to go home. Call him. So they called the man again. And listen what they said. They said to him, give God the glory. Give God the glory. What do they mean? What do they mean? Let's start with that.
That God is the only one that can do miracles. So if you've had a miracle, you praise God.
That's an interesting thought. But what do they really want it to mean?
That Jesus wasn't a prophet.
Yeah, that God had nothing to do with Jesus and with this miracle. So, you know, give God the glory. What does it say? We know this man is a sinner. They want him to make that same confession. They want him to say, oh, well, he violated the Sabbath. He killed me on the Sabbath day. And obviously, he's a sinner. But what does the man do? Give God the glory. What does the man do in response to that instruction? What does he do? Travis, what does he do?
Well, he kind of defers it. He says, I don't know if he's a sinner or not, but he healed me. He
Okay.
goes back to kind of
So he does what?
He refutes what
He
he
refuses it.
He gives God the glory. Does he not? I mean, they say give him the glory. What does he do? I'm going to give God the glory. And he does that. By saying, I don't know. I don't know about whether he's a sinner or not, but I know one thing, God doesn't listen to sinners. I mean, he goes on and continues telling them that Jesus performed the miracle. And obviously, God heard that. We'll pick up with that thought in our lesson next time. So I just think it was kind of interesting. They said, give God the glory. And he said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to give him the glory. And we'll talk about how we give God the glory. That'd be a good thought to talk about. Thank you very much.
giving away.